Bitter criticism reading. I don't remember now. Something from Russia Today, yeah. Or will be. Let's read Russia Today. Because the conflict in the Middle East is getting over, is ending up. There's an article, opinion article saying critical race theory is more insidious than even most conservatives realize, by Graham Rice, an Australian journalist and former media lawyer whose work has been published in the Australian, the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age, the Sunday Mail, The Spectator, and Quadrant. I don't know what's critical race theory. Critical theory is from Frankfurt University. I don't remember, but critical race theory, the much maligned ideology, is not radical or left-wing. It's a tool of elitist control. Such a nice statement. It says, by Graham, I just said, and there's a photograph. A photograph of the black movement. In a recent post, right-wing social commentator and former academic Matt Goodwin announced that he had, quote, just exposed how the British Psychological Society, BPS, had been captured by anti-racist racists. This post is the latest in a series in which Goodwin reveals that various institutions in the UK, including the BBC and the NHS, had been, quote, fully captured by radical, if not extreme ideologies, end quote. This is anti-wokeism. Criticism over wokeism, which I support. One might nitpick over the term radical, but if Goodwin is saying that most powerful institutions in Britain are dominated by woke postmodern ideologies, one can really agree with him. Goodwin's latest post, by citing numerous telling passages from BPS publications, shows beyond a doubt that the BPS has adopted wholesale the postmodern ideology known as, quote, critical race theory, end quote. Goodwin appears shocked by his discovery, but it should not surprise anyone interested in the development of the ideology of critical race theory over the past 5 decades to find that professional institutions like the BPS has been infected by it. The march of various postmodern ideologies through universities and other institutions in the West commenced in the late 1960s in the United States and has intensified exponentially since then. And the literature analyzing this phenomenon, both academic and popular, is vast. It would have been more surprising if Goodwin had discovered that the BPS did not embrace and promulgate critical race theory. But Goodwin's apparent naivety does not end there. Instead of engaging in a critical analysis of the phenomenon that he has discovered, he remains content he remains content to draw the treat conclusion that critical race theory is racist and that those who adhere to it are racist, without, however, defining either term. In arguing in this way, Goodwin was adopt precisely the same model, the same mode of intellectual disputation practiced by those postmodern ideologues that he that he correctly criticizes and condemns. Goodwin himself has no doubt been branded quote-unquote racist by these very same woke intellectuals. Goodwin, just like his intellectual opponents, is satisfied with having reached this purely judgmental conclusion, which allows him to morally condemn the purveyors and adherents of critical race theory. Goodwin seems not to realize that this form of a dominant moral censor is precisely the same as that engaged in ad nauseam by those supposedly quote-unquote radical ideologues that Goodwin has spent the best part of his career denouncing. One must also point out a further error in his analysis that renders his conclusions perfunctory at best. Like many right-wing critics of Western societies, he wrongly believes that postmodern ideologies like critical race theory are quote-unquote radical or quote-unquote left-wing ideologies. This, of course, is not the case. These ideologies, and they include catastrophic climate change, diversity politics, #MeToo feminism, and transgender rights, as well as critical race theory, are in fact deeply conservative, especially in their economic and political effects. These ideologies emerged in the 1970s and have since come to prevail in most Western societies, although they are now coming under increased attack from populist political movements. They constitute the ideological means whereby the newly emerged global elites, who now effectively rule most Western nations, maintain their economic and cultural dominance. To see these ideologies as quote-unquote radical or quote-unquote left-wing in the sense that they are adhered by groups within society that seek to fundamentally challenge the existing economic order is to completely misunderstand them. In fact, once any of these ideologies is adopted, it is absolutely impossible to make a genuinely radical critique in the traditional left-wing sense or any aspect of contemporary Western societies. Even a cursory glance at those groups within society that fervently embrace these ideologies, including academia, large corporations, the judiciary, the public service, and the majority of centrist politicians, proves conclusively their deep conservative import. Can it seriously be suggested that any of these groups want to radically disrupt the current global economic order that each of them so blatantly and avariciously benefits from financially and status-wise? Goodwin's own analysis on the elite coalition of interest groups that opposed Brexit tooth and nail makes it clear that the remainder movement sought to preserve the existing global economic order rather than overturn it. It is true, in a cultural sense, that postmodern ideologies appear to be quote-unquote radical. But that is only because they are opposed to and seek to displace those ideologies adhered to by the previous ruling class. Um, in this case, the 19th and early 20th century bourgeoisie, that the new global order has progressively replaced it economically. Let's get back to Goodwin's analysis. He correctly points out that critical race theory is intellectually incoherent, ahistorical, and completely indefensible on rational grounds, as are virtually all postmodernist ideologies. He also correctly draws attention to its new totalitarian tendencies, but he doesn't ask why this is so, or how such a patently irrational ideology could gain dominance within those very institutions, the universities and professional bodies like the BPS, that up until the 1970s had been home to precisely those 19th century bourgeoisie ideologies that Goodwin nostalgically wishes to resurrect. Goodwin's description of the pernicious effects of critical race theory on the psychological profession is admirable. After reading the passages extracted from the BPS publications set out in his post, one can only ask how the practice of psychology can proceed in any meaningful fashion at all within the ideological straitjacket of an intellectually barren doctrine like critical race theory. Goodwin naively believes that moral condemnation, quote, the BPS has completely lost its way, and exhortation will be sufficient to drive out critical race theory from the cover halls of the BPS. Thus he urges, quote, the elite class to put objective knowledge, truth, and reason before all this ideological dogma and racism, end quote. Not only in his philosophically unsophisticated is this philosophically unsophisticated, but to think that such dominant irrational ideologies, once institutionalized, can be displaced by rational arguments and or moral exhortations is simply foolish. Not only will the quote-unquote elite class that controls the BPS treat Goodwin's critique with contempt, he will be lucky if they don't seek to cancel him. Goodwin also ignores the comprehensive critiques of modern psychology before it was infected by postmodern ideologies like critical race theory, made by historians like Christopher Lasch and others from the 1980s onwards. Modern psychology had become intellectually and morally debauched long before it was infected by critical race theory. Resurrecting an already moribund and compromised profession is hardly a viable solution to the problem that Goodwin has highlighted. Goodwin also fails to appreciate that the only way that postmodern ideologies can be eradicated is through an extraordinary effort of political will. Mainstream political parties in the West, whether conservative or social democratic, are however incapable of even contemplating such a project. So wedded are they themselves to these very ideologies and the elite economic interests that they protect. Interestingly, however, Donald Trump has recently launched such an eradication program with respect to the affirmative action. DEI and transgender rights ideologies within the U.S. public service, military, and other U.S. institutions. But so dominant are these ideologies precisely because they are the ideologies of the contemporary ruling class that it remains an open question as to whether Trump will succeed in banishing them from the institutions that they have so thoroughly infected. In drawing attention to the dominance of critical theory within BPS, Goodwin has highlighted a serious problem, but the limitations of his worldview prevent him from putting forward a coherent analysis of the topic, a comprehensive analysis of the deleterious effect of critical race theory on the practice of psychology in the UK remains to be written. So too does a more wide-ranging critique of critical race theory itself. That's it. The statements, views, and opinions expressed in this column are solely those of the author and do not necessarily represent those of Russia Today. I'm going to read one or two more because I have time in the bus and memory in the car. February 8, 2025. Home World News. NATO troops unable to move quickly across the EU report. Bureaucratic hurdles and logistical chaos are crippling quote-unquote military mobility, the European Court of Auditors has said. And there's a photograph, military personnel. The EU will be unable to move a major military force within the bloc's territory in case of need. A recent report by its financial watchdog stated this week. Bureaucratic hurdles and chaotic logistical planning will prevent a shift deployment. The European Court of Auditors (ECA) concluded in the document. Brussels has already spent all of its budget allocated for improving military logistics between 2021 and 2027 without achieving the stated goal of, quote, moving military staff, equipment, and suppliers swiftly and seamlessly. The ECA said in a statement accompanying the report. Founding worth 1.7 billion euros, $1.76 billion was spent in just 2 weeks, in 2 years, and no money was, quote, left in the pot by the end of 2023, quote, end the quote.
Les doy las gracias y que Dios les bendiga por esa cooperación.
The report said, adding that organizing military movements within the bloc could still face significant delays, end quote. Member states still need to file a notification of cross-border movement 45 days in advance in order to get authorization, according to the paper. One nation's tanks can also be outright banned from crossing into the territory of a neighboring EU member simply because they are heavier than allowed by the neighbor's road traffic regulations, the report said. Military logistics directions can also include infrastructure like bridges that are not suitable for heavy equipment, requiring armor to take a major detour, it added. The ECA blamed the chaotic planning and measurement structure for the setbacks. Quote, Governance arrangements for military mobility in the EU are complex and fragmented without a single point of contact, which makes it difficult to know who does what, it said. With the allocated military mobility budget spent, there will be a quote significant gap of over 4 years end quote before any more funds will be available, it warned. Quote, projects were funded mainly in the east of the EU, but the bloc hardly funded any project at all on the southern route towards Ukraine, end quote, the watchdog said. The ICA, an independent auditing body with a colleague consisting of individual members assigned by each EU member state, has been critical of Brussels' defense policy initiatives over the past several years. In 2024, it warned that the European defense industry program could fail to reach its goals despite a 1.5 billion euros budget due to a poor balance between policy objectives, funding, and the timeline for implementation. The program could result in resources, quote, spread across a wide array of projects that may not have a measurable impact at EU level, end quote, it said. In 2023, it stated that the EU was lacking a long-time strategy on defense spending, while also warning later the same year that financial assistance to Kiev could add tens of billions of euros to the bloc's debt due to Ukraine potentially being unable to repay its loans. And I have no more time for read any news, but I'm going to start the news at least. This I have a news about from India, which normally they are huge, but there it is. February 8th, India eyes 5th generation fighters. Can Russia's Su-57 make the cut? As China advances its air capabilities, New Delhi faces tough choices buying advanced warplanes while pushing for indigenous solutions. By Air Marshal Anil Chopra, retired, an Indian Air Force veteran fighter, test pilot, and is the former Director General of the Center for Air Power Studies in New Delhi. Air Marshal. I thought his name was Air, but it's not. It's a Air Marshal, if you understand.